This story was published in the British Medical Journal and outlines an entirely unbelievable and miraculous story. The sheer fact that it is published in such a journal means that it's certainly not urban legend or some sort of creepypasta. Because of the story's medical nature, we'll refer to the woman as Anne, which I'm sure isn't her real name. So let's get into it. Some of the most tragic medical cases are those of patients whose symptoms go undiagnosed until it's too late. How can they get the care that they need? Sometimes people are lucky enough to have something sinister discovered by happenstance during a routine checkup or test, but sometimes there are greater mysteries at work. The curious case of this patient that we'll call Anne continues to confound the world. According to one telling of the tale, Anne was born in Europe in the 1940s, moving to the United Kingdom around 2 decades later. She married and started a family here, living an entirely unspectacular and healthy life until 1984. This was the year that she heard voices that would go on to save her life. The account reports that Anne had been reading one night in the winter of 1984 when she heard a voice in her own mind, entirely unlike her own.
Please, don't be afraid. I know it must be shocking for you to hear me speaking to you like this, but this is the easiest way I could think of. My friend and I used to work at the Children's Hospital in Great Ormond Street, and we would like to help you.
Anne was, as the story goes, understandably shaken by the experience and visited her doctor straight away. He referred her for psychiatric treatment, obviously. Several weeks later, the voices hadn't returned, and Anne took a nice, soothing vacation. The voices, though, they weren't done with her yet. Whilst she was out of the country, she heard the voices again. This time, they implored her to return back to London, as she supposedly had a medical problem that needed urgently resolved without any delay. On arriving back in the country, they had even relayed to her a specific address for her to visit. This address, it turned out, was that of a London hospital, and Anne was advised by the voices to ask for a brain scan. She had a tumour, she was told, and an inflamed brainstem. She was, of course, sceptical, as was the hospital staff, since there was no symptoms at all. But the expensive treatment was arranged. Sure enough, the Royal Free Hospital detected a brain tumour, and this urgent procedure was carried out without a hitch. Before physicians could have known, before Anne herself felt the slightest ill effects from her condition, these mysterious voices knew of her tumour and warned her about it. Both of these things, of course, should have been entirely impossible. With the operation completed, the story goes that Anne was given one final simple message.
We are pleased to have helped you.
With this, the voices bade her farewell, and Anne never heard from the voices again. It's a fascinating tale that differs slightly depending on who is telling it, but it certainly has some credibility. It was relayed by Dr. Ikechukwu Izonye in the British Medical Journal, after all, so its roots are no folk tale or internet creepypasta. The question is, what really happened here? Is there any possible explanation? Anne believed that she had some sort of guardian angel, but the truth of the matter may just be far more simpler. In Switzerland in 2017, a woman in her late 40s reported that she had heard these voices from above that asked her to offer herself as a divine sacrifice. Under their instruction, she stabbed herself multiple times. In reviewing this unique and disturbing case, psychiatrists have concluded that a tumour growing on the brain had affected her thinking throughout her entire life. Depending on the region of the brain affected, patients can hear voices, sometimes for prolonged periods of time and in vivid detail. This woman reported hearing these divine voices earlier in her life and at various stages as she grew older, experiencing surges of immense religious feeling every time. Recovering from her injuries, she was given an MRI scan which revealed a very slow growing tumour that she may have had since she was a kid. Was Anne's case similar to this? Did her brain tumour cause her to hear voices that warned her about that brain tumour? While there's been no case quite like this in any medical history, it's certainly possible. After all, the voices are known to have disappeared following the successful operation, and Anne had no issues since. She attended a medical conference with Dr. Isnt where various possibilities were put forward. It was even suggested that Anne may have created the fanciful story whilst she was in Europe and coming to the UK to have the inexpensive procedure performed for free under the National Health Service. However, Anne had lived in this country for a decade and a half prior to hearing the voices, so that theory really does seem unlikely. Perhaps the voices were symptomatic of her tumour, or perhaps she was vaguely aware that there was just something wrong in herself. Two possibilities that Dr. Isnt personally supported. With no definitive answer though, we can't discount the possibility that something more spectacular saved Anne's life. Whatever the true reason for these voices were, it worked and it saved Anne. Thanks for hanging out with me again for another video, folks. I hope to see you in the next one. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe so that you don't miss any of my other stuff. Take care of yourselves, and remember, keep smiling.